a poetry knowledgeable of image and music, pieces of energy on a taut string, and shining sanity. Anderson's contemporary Yusef Komunyakaa remarks on her ability to tell an extended story without sacrificing the lyricism. We're fortunate that tonight to have this communication between speaker and reader offered to us in the voice of the poet herself. Maggie Anderson's poetry is rich in its evocations of the natural world, describing a coming storm as a lover, giving it my own white back like the leaves, or conjuring up a clear image of the wide mittens of sassafras. It is often also deeply rooted in a sense of place. West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania figure prominently in her work, as do the people in those places. The out-of-work steelworkers, for example, forced into drinking one beer after another, talking politics with the bartender, and at the end of the day going home just as if you had a paycheck, your body singing with the pull and heave of imagined machinery and heat. Grief and sorrow permeate many of the poems as well, as does the imperative connection between the past and the present. And always you will find an insistent voice of hope and human love, expressed so movingly and delightfully in poems like The Thing You Must Remember and Self-Portrait. Now, I don't know if we'll get to hear those particular poems tonight or not, but if we don't, you can find those poems right up here afterwards in Maggie Anderson's most recent collection, so be sure and know that that opportunity is available to you at the end of the reading. Miss Anderson's most recent book is, as I said, Windfall, which is published by the Pitt Poetry Series out of the University of Pittsburgh. It is a collection of new poems as well as selected ones from 3 previous volumes. Years That Answer from 1980, Cold Comfort from 1986, and A Space Filled with Moving 1992. An award-winning small press volume, The Great Horned Owl, was published in 1979. The Pushcart Prize Honorable Mention has been awarded to 2 of her poems, Closed Mill and Big Romance. Anderson has also co-edited an anthology, Learning by Heart, Contemporary Poetry About School. And she has been editing the work of the late Appalachian writer Louise McNeill. She has edited a collection of her poetry called Hill Daughter and a prose memoir called The Milkweed Ladies. Anderson is Associate Professor of English at Kent State University, where she directs the Wick Poetry Program. We're very fortunate to have her with us tonight, so please join me in making her welcome.
Thank you very much, Tina and Sandy and the Georgia Poetry Circuit for bringing me here to Berry College. You have many, many beautiful people here at Berry. I thought I would tell you that because I'm sure you've heard that you have many, many beautiful acres of land on your campus, and I just thought, not to be outdone by your environment. You're also a nice-looking group of folks, and I'm very happy to be here. I'd actually like to begin with a poem that Tina mentioned, Body and Soul. This is a very early poem, and I sort of like to start. It doesn't matter to you. If you've not heard any of my poems, they could have been written yesterday or 20 years ago, but it matters to me to start with an old one, so I will. Body and Soul. I have waited for this storm as if for the one great love of my life, and meet it now knowing I have always been ready. Ripe to be licked by wind, I give it my own white back like the leaves, toss in my mind as the fireflies circle. My arms edge toward it in twilight with a tenderness I've sought for years. My fingers slide familiar over thin notes as if remembered. Yes, this was how it would be. All the houses and the sheds would pall. The air would fill and the sky yellow before the breaking loose with it at last. Just as my own precise rhythms now rest one beat, then syncopate. Just as that solid breath now blows straight from the sacs of the rain. I have some poems that I wrote while, about 10 years ago, I guess, while I was living in Oregon, and they were mostly poems. It's funny, a lot I've said sometimes I'm always homesick for wherever I'm not. When I was in Oregon, which I had longed to go to, I was very homesick for West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania, where I had been before. Now that I'm in Georgia, I'm homesick for Ohio, where I live now, and by the time I'm back in Ohio next week, I'll probably be homesick for Georgia. I'm a malcontent, that's what people had told me. But while I was there in Oregon, I was writing poems, a lot of which came out of sounds and scenes I remembered from the mountains. And so I wrote this one poem that I'll read you now called Ontological that tries to sort of reproduce in poetic form some of the diction, some of the language, and some of the attitude of the Appalachian Mountain people. I called it Ontological. Actually, I gave all these little poems big philosophical titles because I thought they needed some kind of punch. I thought I had these poems that are fairly simple to understand, but if they were called things like epistemological, phenomenological, and actually this one is called Ontological, and I do think in some ways this is the nature of being. This is going to cost you. If you really want to hear a country fiddle, you have to listen hard, high up in its twang and needle. You can't be running off like this, all knotted up with yearning, following some train whistle. Can't hang on to anything that way. When you're looking for what's lost, everything's a sign. But you have to stay right up next to the drawl and pull of the thing you thought you wanted, had to have it, could not live without it. Honey, you will lose your beauty and your handsome sweetie, this whine, this agitation, the one you sent for with your leather boots and your guitar. The lonesome snag of barbed wire you have wrapped around your heart is cash money, honey. You will have to pay. Nasty little poem, but true, I think. Let's see, I forgot where I was going. I will read another poem out of the West Virginia mountains. It's one that we're talking about today. From Matt was driving me around the campus. This is called Related to the Sky. And it's a poem not so much about being in the hills, but looking at the hills. Off in the distance, as you can do here. You can stand in the fields here and see the line of the hills. And so I wrote this poem for a part of West Virginia where that's sort of your constant view. Related to the sky. At dusk, the blue line of these hills looks, of course, like this. So I wave. Hello, hills. Being hills, they do not speak back, but just draw in more light. Clouds, a small platoon of healing hands, brush the trees. I try to find the exact spot of the stars I liked in last night's sky. Impossible. The leaves sift and muffle, make room for the moon. I try to remember the color of those leaves, how they were, Their shaggy shapes, now draped in dark, cover the round animal back of the hills. I try to remember how it was once ocean floor and will be again, ancestral and related to the sky. I like to work on poems in groups, not necessarily a series, not necessarily one that goes after another, but I like to sort of work with the same subject matter, the same form over several different poems, because it takes some of the pressure off the individual poem and allows you to be working in some different ways with it. Those of you who are writers know that that can happen. Or painters. I really got this from painters. They'll do, a series of paintings called Green 1, Green 2. And I thought, well, you could do that in poems too. And this is, I'll read you two of this little group. These are poems that came from looking at photographs by the photographer Walker Evans. Are any of you familiar with Walker Evans' photographs? Some of you probably are. During the 1930s, he worked for the federal government. Many artists worked for the federal government, documenting what was going on in the country at that time. And he came down into the South, into Alabama, and into, I think he was in parts of Georgia and in West Virginia. And he took photographs of people who, during the Depression, of course, were poor. And these poems were, for me, I guess, a kind of conversation with Walker Evans about those photographs, because I love the photographs. They're beautiful. He was a fashion photographer, actually. He worked for Vogue magazine. He came and took pictures of coal miners and set them up, pretty much the way he might have composed a picture for Vogue. On the other hand, he was taking pictures that were examples of poverty. And so when he was in towns that I knew, places I knew, I had this uneasiness. And then I came across a picture at one point that was of a cemetery. And he had focused his camera on my grandfather's gravestone. And it was just the most, it was the strangest experience to see that, to see his art reflected back to me as my family history. So the only thing I could do, I guess being an artist, was to make my art from his art to get back my family. So I'll read you that one poem. House and Graveyard, Rollsburg, West Virginia, 1935. I can't look long at this picture. A Walker Evans photograph of a West Virginia graveyard in the Great Depression. Interesting for the sharp light it throws on poverty. Intimate for me because it focuses on my private and familial dead. This is where my grandparents, my Uncle Adrian and my Aunt Margaret I am named for, are buried. Adrian died at 7, long before I was born. Margaret died in childbirth in 1929. The morning sun falls flat against the tombstones, then spreads across Cannon Hill behind them. I see how beautiful this is, even though everyone was poor. But in Rollsburg, nothing's changed. Everything is still the same, just grayer. Beside the graveyard is Fike's house, with the rusty bucket, the tattered trellis, and the same rocker Evans loved. Miss Funk, the schoolteacher, now retired, and her widowed sister still lived down the road, out of the camera's range. I remember how my Aunt Nida loved that mountain, how my father told of swinging from the railroad bridge down into the Cheat. Nida worked for the Farm Security Administration too, as Evans did. She checked people's houses for canned goods to see how many they had stored, and she walked the road by here every day. I can't look long at this picture. It warps my history into politics, makes art of my biography through someone else's eyes. It's a good photograph, but Walker Evans didn't know my family, nor the distance his careful composition makes me feel now from my silent people in their graves. While I'm on my silent people, I'll read you a poem for my Aunt Nida, who was the one member of my family who appreciated my writing, I thought. At least she sort of liked the idea that I was going to be a writer. She was a reader. She read the Bible every day. And she also read, when I went to summer school one summer at West Virginia University, I went to her house in Rollsboro, West Virginia on the weekends. And she read all the novels that I was reading that summer in my Southern Literature class. I would read them and we'd talk about them in class, and then I'd bring them over and leave them with her and come back the next weekend and she would have read them. It was a wonderful experience. We kind of got 2 college educations for the price of one. It was sort of a neat deal. And what I always loved about her was that to her, all the characters in the novels were absolutely real. It's like, why do those people do that? It was so completely alive. Anyway, she worked very, very hard. She kept house for her husband and her older brother. And she was an amazing woman. So I thought I wanted to write some kind of tribute to her because I didn't feel she had had proper tribute in her life. So I wrote this for her. It's called Sonnet for Her Labor. And I wrote it as a sonnet in part because the one thing she didn't understand about my poetry was why it didn't always rhyme. So I thought if I was going to write for her, I'd better make it on. My Aunt Nida's kitchen was immaculate and dark. And she was always bending to the sink below the window, where the shadows off the bulk of Laurel Mountain rose up to the brink of all the sky she saw from there. She clattered pots on countertops wiped clean of coal dust, fixed 3 meals a day, fried meat, mixed batter for buckwheat cakes, hauled water in what seemed lust for labor. One March evening, after cleaning, she lay down to rest and died. I can see Uncle Ed, his fingers twined at his plate for the blessing. My Uncle Craig, leaning back, silent in red galluses. No one said a word to her. All that food and cleanliness. No one ever told her it was good. Change the tone a little bit here and read you just a couple of poems that are not mine, but are from this anthology, Learning by Heart, Contemporary American Poetry About School. One of the most fun things I've done in my life was putting together this anthology. I did it with a former student of mine named David Hassler. I did a lot of work during the 1970s and 80s in the Poets in the Schools program. Are some of you familiar with that, where poets go into public schools and teach poetry to the students? Did any of you ever have poets coming to your school? No? Oh, you missed so much. I'm glad I'm here now. Anyway, David was doing what I've been doing and going into the schools and working with kids, and we both got excited about the idea of putting together an anthology of poems that would all be by poets who published, and they would all be about school. They would all be about like some kind of school experience. So we had a little section of poems called Homeroom. We have one called Language Lessons, one called Sports and Clubs, one called The History of Our People. And I'll read you 2 of these that are not mine. This one is called Room 19, Eakin Elementary, and it's by Diane Gilliam Fisher. Perhaps some of you will remember this. You have to remember way back to your elementary school experiences. There's a boys' line and a girls' line in Miss Sharp's room, and line leaders. 3 reading groups, lions, tigers, and zebras. Miss Sharp tells you once, then it's up to you. Remember what you are. It's not allowed visiting with your neighbor. It's not allowed poking your pencil through your milk carton for the straw. You get lead poison. It's not allowed telling what you dreamed for sharing. You have to bring something people can see. You have to write with fat pencils that make you write slower. When you write capital letters, go almost to the top line, but don't touch it. It's poison. When it's free time, you have to use it wisely. When it's recess, girls hold hands and march between the tetherballs, teachers, and boys and sing with their faces pushed out real far. We don't stop for nobody. We don't stop for nobody. Do you remember that? This is a real short one by William Stafford, a well-known American poet, called First Grade. This is the first poem in the sports and clubs section. In the play, Amy didn't want to be anybody, so she managed the curtain. Sharon wanted to be Amy, but Sam wouldn't let anybody be anybody else. He said it was wrong. All right, Steve said, I'll be me, but I don't like it. So Amy was Amy, and we didn't have the play, and Sharon cried. See why I had fun putting this with you. Some of the poems in here are not from the point of view of the students, but from the point of view of the teachers. And this is one that comes out of a teaching experience I had being a poet in the schools. I went to a lot of public schools in southern West Virginia, which is coal mining country. And there are still some one-room country schools there. And I went to one of these schools in a town called Spanishburg, which is near a town called Matoka, which is at the top of, I forget the name of the mountain, but it's the top of some mountain, and you have to turn left when you see the sign that says God has a plan for you, and then go 5 miles down a dirt road and turn right onto the Tug River, and after that comes Spanishburg. That's how I got there. The poem is called Spitting in the Leaves, and there's a couple things I just want to share with you. It was the fashion that year for boys in West Virginia to wear these big cowboy hats with feathers down the back. So they were wearing these hats, and I was the poet coming to the school. These guys were leaning against the wall at the back of the room when I walked in, and it was one of my most intimidating moments as a poet, trying to think what I was going to do with these big 10th grade guys leaning against the wall. And so I went up to one of them and I said, "That's a nice hat you have. What kind of feathers are those?" And he said, "Skunk feathers." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Does a skunk have feathers?" And we sort of began to talk out of that. He had one over on me, and so then we talked about poems. And actually, that guy still lives in that part of the country. If you ever go through Bluefield, West Virginia, right as you go into a big tunnel near Wisville, Virginia, there's an auto body shop there called Thor's Body Shop. And Thor is my skunk feathers guy. And he likes to tell people a woman wrote a poem for him. Anyway, the darker side of this, well, it's both kind of dark side, I guess, is that they have a very high dropout rate in the high schools in this county. And one of the things that happens in this county in West Virginia, as happens in Kentucky and North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia, is that whenever there is a war or a call for people to enlist in the service, the young men and women from these states are always the first to go, partly out of patriotism and partly out of a need for a place to be. It's a way of employment. So, this poem links those two things and links my friend Thor, and the poem isn't nearly as long as the introduction. Spitting in the Leaves. In Spanishburg, there are boys in tight jeans, mud on their cowboy boots, and they wear huge hats with feathers. Skunk feathers, they tell me. They do not want to be in school, but are. Some teacher cared enough to hold them. Unlike their thin, disheveled cousins, the boys on Matoka's Main Street in October who loll against parking meters and spit into the leaves. Because of them, someone will think we need a war. will think the best solution would be for them to take their hats and feathers, their good country manners, and drag them off somewhere, to Vietnam, to El Salvador, and they'll go. They'll go from West Virginia, from hills and back roads that twist like politics through trees, and they'll fight, not because they know what for, but because what they know is how to fight. What they know is feathers, their strong, skinny arms, their spitting in the leaves. I wrote a poem for a teacher, my art teacher, and I'll read that one to you now. This is called The Thing You Must Remember. When I was 8, my mother was sick, ill, and subsequently died when I was just about 9. And there was an art teacher in the school that I went to who seemed to know what I was going through, and he seemed to know that it wasn't possible to talk about it. So she let me work in the art room with the clay, and this is a poem, for her and for that. Probably some of you have had teachers or a teacher at some time in your life who has given you something when you felt like you didn't have anything. And if so, I hope you tell that teacher something. The thing you must remember. The thing you must remember is how, as a child, you worked hours in the art room, the teacher's hands over yours molding the little clay dog. You must remember how nothing mattered but the imagined dog's fur, the shape of his ears and his paws. The gray clay felt dangerous. Your small hands were pressing what you couldn't say with your limited words. When the dog's back stiffened, then cracked to white shards in the kiln, you learned how the beautiful suffers from too much attention, how clumsy a single vision can grow, and fragile with trying too hard. The thing you must remember is the art teacher's capable hands, large, rough and grainy, over yours, holding on. Another little group of poems I have are some poems called the Black Dog poems. Black Dog is many things. Black Dog is the dogs that the Nazi stormtroopers used to track people down during the Second World War. Black Dog is a name for clinical depression. Winston Churchill, who had suffered from clinical depression, said that his black dog followed him everywhere. Black Dog is my dog Lucy, who's a black lab. And there's a Black Dog Cafe in Martha's Vineyard, where this is, I don't know why this just popped into my head, but it's true. One of the gifts that Bill Clinton gave to Monica Lewinsky was a t-shirt from the Black Dog Cafe. Has nothing to do with this book. So these are several Black Dog poems, and they hit in one way or another on those various kinds of dogs and how they work in my life. This one's called Black Dog Remembers. This is the scary black dog. Black Dog remembers everything. No forgetfulness here. The glare of concentration, pathological vigilance, the growl snarl deep in the throat, up in your face when anyone comes to the door. Black Dog took threats to heart. The knives, the hiss and scent of the unvented gas heater, the andiron and the penis, the fist. Now I hold on to this big black dog stretched across my chest, so close it might smother me or rescue me from the other, mad dog, dead dog, my father. This is called The Game. I take the black dog down to the field in early morning. I find a stick heavy enough to seem like work and thick enough for her to get her teeth into. We begin. Sit, I tell her. Fetch. Drop. Sit. Fetch. Drop. Black dog leaps and turns and slides through wet grass and muck. She wants to outrun the stick's trajectory, to catch the task mid-air, get ahead of the game. So many sticks, so many ways to chase and grab and bring. Although she pants and shakes and slows, Black Dog would do this unto death if I did not stop her, which I always do, by making the sticks go away, by holding her wet, muddy head in my hands to slip the leash back on, by wiping off her bloody jaw. Sit, Black Dog, I say. Lie down. Lie down. And this one is called Black Dog Goes to Art Colony. I went to an art colony, so the Black Dog went to an art colony. Wonderful places. They let you just work on your writing there. They take care of meals and all these things for you, and there's lots of interesting people around to talk to in the evenings, and they have volleyball nets and trails to walk on. Black Dog and I had a good time. Black Dog Goes to Art Colony. I like it here. I like it here. They do things in packs. At night, they pile together on the floor. I lie down on the leather jackets and boots and the skinny ties I sink my teeth into and shake. Tonight, as usual, they are listening to someone talk. I track the smells: linseed oil and mink oil, bag balm, gasoline and tar, cigarettes, tall, thin man smell, cologne and sweat, great big woman smell, plastic, powder, and pastries. That woman's still talking, and now they've got a fire going, smoke and pine and burning sap and sulfur. It's the fire makes them want to drowse and pet a dog. I move to one side, then the other, to catch the petters. The guy with the pickup truck takes me with him to the dump. Otherwise, I don't have too many duties here. I've found my place to settle, among the brass studs and the leather, the elbows and knees where I'm waiting for the shoe to drop, for the talk to stop, for them to whistle and clap for me, to call my name. Good dog, good dog. It's my Black Dog. This is called Self-Portrait. I was far outside the frame, beyond the pale, lost in the margins, smudged like a fingerprint, and frankly nervous about holding my own. I knew what was coming, you, toward me, your arms open, preparing to wrap them around my neck with the clear determination some people bring to learning anthropology. I was not about to be moved, to be swept off my feet by your exotic bracelets. I'll admit I sometimes incline toward the minute particulars of a scene, but never have I been undone by a woman on account of her accessories, until now, when I come into the picture, captivated by black coral beads, the gold wire of an earring, the rustle of red scarf against a neckline, as this pull, this great tug at my heart, lifts me into the foreground, at the center of the photograph of empty beach, empty that is except for you, and pine, and manzanita, the silver rings and necklaces of white surf. How much amount of time is the clock?
It's been about half an hour.
I wanted to read you what did I want to read you? I wanted to read you something that isn't finished. This one I've been working on. It's getting more finished, but maybe Actually, I think when someone reads poetry, the audience is your collaborator. We're doing this together, and there's a sense in which, as I read, I hear the poems differently because you're hearing them with me. And you're very good collaborators, so I feel brave enough to read this one. It's pretty new. I've only read it one other time. It's called In Real Life. That is, as opposed to dream life. I always think it's so funny that people say, well, in real life, I mean, your dreams are real too. Okay. In real life, the sky muddies up to the color of the dog. I've been napping in my chair and have wakened just in time for evening. Sleeping in the daytime sharpens me for nightlife, as if it were my job to get up and wet down my reeds to play the clarinet in a small ensemble where the first set doesn't start till 10:30. My nap was the color of a moss agate, gray-green and striped, massaged to sheen and sweat. The usual nightmares. The house burns down with all my writing in it. A famous and successful writer friend offers me her dregs. Here, take these. I don't need them anymore. My editor ransacks my closet. His shirt is ripped off by my faithful and beautiful half-vicious dog. In real life, I am planning a new career. I imagine for myself a small congregation of gay Episcopalians somewhere in the Midwest, in a town not known for tolerance, but respectful, even in a bit of awe of anything that passes for style. I am their priest, their good shepherd, and all my flock play musical instruments and give amusing dinner parties. Or there is the life I seem to have napped myself into, in which I'm cleaning my reeds and shining my shoes for the band that doesn't exist, in the town I never lived in, playing the instrument I don't know how to play. This is called Epiphany. A wonderful word, epiphany. A strong wind tilts the trees. Empty branches rustle in the backwash. It's such a nice warm day. Very unusual here in January. When I take the dog for a walk, my hair blows back, then up over my head like a loose fur piece, a rabbit hat. I wear my purple scarf and a light jacket. The dog pulls me off the sidewalk into the soft, wet grass of the park. No need for gloves. Unusual in January. Every day I walk longer, farther, need less and less. In my neighborhood, some people have nailed straw, red berries, and strips of fat to blocks of wood for the birds. This year, not even they are hungry. This is a poem called Signs Following, which comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, if you know some of you. And these signs shall follow them that believe. They shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. When did we think we were safe? A broom on the porch casts a shadow. A horse is sliding on snowmelt. Where are the reins and black saddles? A truck hauls coal to the railroad. Train of invective, common wailing, wind. The box of serpents in the brush arbor rattles, is open with lifting and shouting, and speaking in tongues. Red-headed cousin handles the vipers, circles his shoulder, wraps the scar on his arm. How reluctant the unruly jury to indict their neighbor, the preacher, who led them out of black hollows, the bright spirit flashing like high-powered rifle fire, with signs following, dangerous acts. And another little short one. I've been doing two kinds of poems lately. Great big long ones and little tiny short ones. It's a new poetic trend. The Sleep Writer. Lovely afternoon. The firing squad. Bottles lined up in the sun. Dahlias, men in uniform, daffodils. Children with satchels coming home from school. I am writing in my sleep. The journey here was not very long, only a little cold. The fast horses of exhaustion pulled me. Too many people, I write, are watching what we do. Too much sun on the green glass. The firing squad. The lovely afternoon. Give myself in a hole of gloom. Get us out. I'll get us out. Don't worry. One of the things I loved in Oregon was the flowers that came in the springtime there were so enormous. Some of you maybe have been to Oregon or the West Coast or the Pacific Northwest. They have, we have rhododendron here in the east and the southeast. We have rhododendron, beautiful, nice, tame looking flower. In Oregon, they have rhododendron that are the size of this tabletop here. They're like rhododendron. I mean, they're enormous. And I fell in love with them. I couldn't help myself. It was just, I fell in love with them and with the azaleas and with all the flowers. It was the biggest thing that ever happened. So this is called Big Romance. This spring, my wildest love has been the lilacs and the pink azaleas blooming in after-dinner light along the alleys. I love how raindrops remain a while, like pearls, at the neckline of the chemise of these geraniums. And I dress up when I go out to woo them, with my dark hair and my gentle hands. When I hold this lavender and yellow spotted Korean rhododendron, it reminds me of the open faces of healthy children I have known, well-fed and clever, in clean sneakers and little overalls. I have totally surrendered to the opulence of suburban shrubbery, colors like the old hotels, magenta, puce, red moon and orange of pumpkin pulp, yellow of wild mustard, citronella. Only the brightest ones draw bees, but I am fickle and speak sweetly even to the pale gardenias, throwing their cloying fragrance indiscriminately over the warm air. I would like to be a person they find attractive, so I have gathered all the fallen petals from the paths and made a hat of them. A hat I will wear like my heart on my sleeve, foolish as I've grown with love for flowers. I will maybe read I think I will read 2 more poems. You really are a very nice group to speak to. Very quiet, well behaved. Sometimes we were talking this afternoon, some people who write poetry here at Berry College and I were sitting in one of these lovely rooms chatting, and we were talking about how a part of writing a poem is always mysterious. And you don't always know where a poem comes from, and you don't always know when it's done. You don't always know when it goes, where it goes when it's over, but it's there. And this is one of those poems for me. It's called Dear Friend, and it says something in it about friendship, but I don't know that I could articulate what other than the poem itself. So I like to think that it would work probably as some way of saying something for anyone who has ever had a friend, which is a tall order for a poem, but I think it should work that way because I have no idea where it came from. Dear friend, it is not enough to say I miss the days we worked together side by side in the studio, with 5 windows glazed by the citron of northern light near water. You muttering to yourself as you readied paper for the watercolors of Inland River and the Bluff. I concentrating half on the words I was writing and half on you. I have not forgotten anything. I have remembered you wholly into this day. Although we talked of it, we never reached the sea. How clearly we had imagined it, the salt marshes, whips of kelp littering the beaches. The discoveries in those hours were mutual, our agreements as thrilling to us as our differences. Our talk was silver we polished like dinner knives and stored among ironed linens and napkin rings. We worked as we have never worked before, confident and passionate in the brief hours. My friend, I send you this letter from the landscape of our days together, from this memorial atmosphere, stunning in strafe of light through moving leaves. You must not wonder if I think of you still. We came such a distance in our sturdy boats. I remain steadfast here, though you have crossed over to the dreamed sea. And I will end with a poem called The Only Angel. Angels, it turns out, speak in sonnets too. There was a lot going on with angels about 4 or 5 years ago. Well, it still is. There's a television show called Touched by an Angel, but there was really a lot a few years ago. Angels seemed to be everywhere. It was like an invasion of angels. And I think poets are not immune to everything going on in the world of commodities and various fetishes of commodities. But we try to say something different about them. And I finally thought, all right, I'm going to write an angel poem. Everybody's writing an angel poem. I'm going to write an angel poem. But I'm going to write an angel poem that is about the only angel I really believe that I will have to wrestle with at the end, and that will be the angel of death. And as soon as I said that to myself, I'm going to write a poem about the angel of death. The angel of death came and spoke to me. She sounds a whole lot like a sensible mountain woman. But this is what she said, and she's right. This is another one of those nasty little poems, but I'll leave you. The only angel. Remember, the angel's speaking. I can see that what with one thing and another, you're all worn down. But you have to quit calling out to me with all these elegies. You're sweet, but it's clear you don't know shit from Shinola. I could bring you to your knees with one hard kiss, but I want you to mother up the good life. Get around a little more. You're trying too hard, hedging your bets. I am not a porcelain light behind the trees. You can't touch me. I'm not even here yet. Your heart attack, your wreck, your slow disease. I am what you cannot know. The blank, imposing door that you will storm one day to get at me, hot and ready, since you have to be. Thank you very much.
There's probably a few minutes if anybody would have questions, if you would be willing to entertain those. So
You want to ask? You can ask me anything. I'm not scared. You want to ask me anything?
I like the way you have eye contact with the audience.
Thank you. It's a good audience to have eye contact with. You're listening. Okay? You can also ask me questions a little more privately if you want to come up here. If you come up here and want to look at a book or something, you could do that too. Oh yes, there is.
What's your dog's name?
Lucy. It's a good question. I often say what my dog's name is. Anything else anybody wants to know? Okay. Thank you again for coming.